Stephanie's last question, I thought was a good one, measuring what we value. So I wanted to ask Michelle how you're going to do that. How do you know? Could you say a little bit more about how you're working with the hospitals to find out whether what you think you're doing is translating into reality?
So one of the things that we're doing is partnering with the hospital to really talk to them about what it is that they need the graduates to come out of school with, what's important to them, what skills, what knowledge base, what level of competency is important, so that we can work closely with them as we think about how that impacts education on our side. In particular, as we look to develop our simulations. So let me give you an example. We know from the research that you're better off having your heart attack in the parking lot of Meijer than you are having your heart attack in the hospital. Because in part, it's the way the systems are set up and the way the processes are set up. Most hospitals don't really have teams in place to manage that. So part of it's a hospital process, but part of it is just the way that we train staff to sort of recognize those signals. We train first responders to recognize signals of an acute MI. We don't necessarily train our inpatient staff to do that. So maybe that's something that we need to rethink. Maybe that's something that every nurse that graduates really needs to understand. What does an acute MI look like when it happens to a hospitalized patient? What does an acute stroke look like when it happens to a hospitalized patient? Because those things do happen, and we need to teach people to recognize those things. So we can do that in the learning environment. So those are the kinds of things that we partner and talk to them about to say, what is it we need to do on our end to make them successful on your end?
Yeah, I thought very, very inspiring talks. I was especially appreciative of the last slide that Stephanie showed of, really, yes, measuring what we value. And that raises the question, obvious question, that learning is not a monolithic concept. And from the perspective of a student who is in the nursing school, or a student in computer science, or a student in the business school, learning really translates into success when they can apply that learning as a skill on the job. But someone who is here for a liberal education in philosophy or history or what have you, learning success may have a very different outcome. So it seems to me that there's really a multidimensional definition of outcome here that depends critically on what we're trying to get at. Are we trying to get at sort of the a definition of well-being, like Sudip Banerjee had mentioned this morning, or is it or are we trying to get at financial success or success in having a comfortable lifestyle? And so I'm just sort of throwing this out. It's not really a question, it's more of a comment to try and solicit some response from the panelists as to what we mean by success and value in learning, and how to come up with something quantitative as data scientists that we can seek to optimize, or at least to lower bounds, so that we're not doing harm.
Yeah, I can try. So I think in addition to what we value as an institution in terms of when we think about our students, what should be the outcomes, I believe that also what students value should matter. And that in a way would point to personalized education. We might still be far from that long-term goal of doing education that would aim at an individual student needs or wishes in terms of outcomes. And we get that all the time. In computer science, for instance, we'll have students asking, what classes should I take if I want to go and work at Google? So they have their own wishes. They might care less about a certain grade in a certain type of class, and they might care more about what exactly do they need to do to have the career they dream of. And so even if we cannot do truly personalized education right now, we can still move in that direction with the kind of information that we can collect and analyze in learning analytics projects, in the sense of, for instance, determining what is that, say, what is really painful for me, what women in computer science like. So if we could do that kind of personalization that aims at larger groups, and that in turn will define what the outcomes should be. So do we want, maybe we want students to be successful in the terms of having higher GPAs, but maybe we also want other things. For instance, say women to feel more engaged in an engineering degree, or there could be other outcomes that are sort of defined bottom up from the students by understanding their needs or values and so forth.
I agree with Rada, but I would add that I am wary of making the kind of dichotomous distinction that you make between fields that have sort of concrete and well-known and well-defined knowledge bases versus that don't, because we know that the world and the job scene is changing quite a bit, and people are talking a lot about things that have been called various things like 21st century skills, non-cognitive skills, and so forth. And I would say that those are skills, the kinds of things that students need to learn no matter what their major is. And furthermore, we may be training them for a job that they have tomorrow, but we also know that most people today don't have the same job their whole life. And we really value this concept of lifelong learners. And so what we really want our students to be able to do is to know how to be lifelong learners so they can have a job that's fulfilling and rewarding and hopefully financially stable through their whole life, no matter if they were chemistry majors or philosophy majors.
That's what makes it so difficult, because personalized learning can't simply be to meet the desires of the student at the present time, right? I'm sure we've all had students. One of my most successful students who wrote back 5 or 6 years after he graduated that the course that he thought was the most useful for him in his work environment was the one that he hated the most, and I happened to teach that class.
You hear that
and he
in
was
the School of
basically
Information.
apologizing for having given me a very bad faculty
Oh,
evaluation.
it was a required course, wasn't it? That's your dad
it was
as an
indeed,
instructor.
yes. So that's just an example of how it's a very tough problem to try and sort of figure out what is the personalized education objective, short-term, long-term, whether it be for well-being or financial success or what have you. So I think that dichotomy is somehow, we're going to have to deal with it. Yeah.
Well, and I think then if you add in the challenge that some of the professions have when their students have to take like licensing examinations,
It's a
Yes.
different.
then you add in,
Yeah.
do you teach to the test?
Yeah.
Do you teach them the things that they know to pass the test, or do you focus more on teaching them to be successful in their profession and to be a more grounded, lifelong learner? And some of the things that we struggle with is content saturation. It's like, healthcare and medicine is changing so fast that there's so much that they need to know. There's no way that we can teach them everything that they'll ever need to know. So some of the things that we focus on is teaching them where to find the information. It's like it used to be we would teach them a certain number of medications. Like, it was really important for them to come to clinical with their medication cards. So it's like, okay, look up your patient the night before and come prepared with all your medication cards for the medications they're on. We don't do that anymore because patients turn over so quickly, they won't even know who their patient is till they arrive that day. So really now it's more important that they understand where to go to find the information about medications that their patient's on. So it's like every day things are changing, and they're going to go into a world where we learn something new all the time. So now it's more about teaching people how to find the information, how to stay up on the latest evidence-based practices. And so it's like constantly trying to keep the faculty updated as much as it is about the students staying updated. So it's a very interesting mix.
So I would put as a challenge to this talented group of developing a way to measure what you value in some systematic way, so you're actually testing what you want. And it's probably not a multiple choice test, but
No.
it's okay.
Good.
Please.
Hello? Oops. Hello? I
Here.
got a special touch. Okay,
Got it.
got it, closer. Okay, hi, I'm Karen Fireman. I've actually, I think, spoken a little bit to each of you, and I'm really fascinated by your issues that you've brought up here, and so I have to kind of limit myself, but I would love to talk to you more offline. But a couple thoughts. First for Rada. We in the EECS department, ECE particularly, but I'm sure others, have actually looked a lot at the question of why is engineering, you posed it as computer science, but actually it's across all the engineering fields as well. Why do we have less women over a long period of time? And I think it's a really important question, and one that doesn't have a quick answer, but really deserves study. I think there's a lot to it, and it's not just they're not interested in STEM, or I think there's a really wide. I mean, just for example, I do recruiting for the school, and I do alumni reviews and whatnot, and there are women. I talk to women who are trying to get into engineering. I don't know if they always get in, you know. And we don't even know what appeals to people these days. A lot of times people want to go to the hot job, you know, whatever that hot thing is. For a long time we lost engineers to finance, right? Because they could make a lot of money in investment banks. So I'm there. I agree with you that this is a huge topic, but I caution us in making too many quick assumptions. I guess that's what you were saying. Stephanie was kind of making, let's not jump to conclusions about stuff like, for example, your US data versus your Canadian. Was that Michigan or lots of schools for your US data? Were you, Rada, did you have the US data versus the Canadian?
There was several schools, not only
Oh, it was
Michigan.
several, okay,
Yeah,
because it might not be the same across different schools. And anyway, I would love to engage you all more and have you some of your comments back now as well as other times about what really motivates people to be in certain careers. And you know, when we were coming into school, I mean, some schools basically, if you were alive, they would sign you up. You know, now they have to kill themselves to get in. I mean, they have to look like super women and supermen in order to just possibly get in.
So can I jump in though to
Please
offer
do.
some one
Please
of the most lovely findings from the earliest of the learning analytic works that we did. Tim McKay led a group of students who were in our Learning Analytics Fellow program, and they did a systematic analysis of every course with over 400 students taught on the Michigan campus for the last 12 years, and did a simple regression. What was the student's grade in that course against their GPA out that course? Right. And identified systematically a cluster of courses where on average every student who took that course got a lower grade than their GPA, and furthermore the difference was bigger for women than men.
Wow. So that's a killer.
So you're getting kids into what are those courses? Those are the gateway STEM courses, right?
Right.
So even if you're getting these women in these courses, right, they're making it all the way through the stereotype thread and all the hassle, and they're finally coming to college, they want to be a chem major, they want to be a math major, they want to be an engineer, and they get to their first big time college gateway courses, and somebody's telling them you're not as smart as you thought you were.
Right. Right.
And so what do? A lot of women?
Switch.
They switch majors, right?
Right,
So
exactly.
there's a lot of analysis to be done there, but those are the kinds of insights I think that we can use data analytics to not just understand the students, but understand how we're teaching.
I couldn't
And what
agree
are
with
the
you more.
characteristics of that? Now, it gets dicey when I tell you we can do that analysis. If you think about it, for a few seconds, you realize, well, wait a minute. That means and we can present that information because it's aggregated over many instructors, many semesters, many years. But then you realize, well, but somebody could pull that apart and say, who's the worst offender in the department? You know, who has the biggest grade penalty effect for women versus men?
Right.
So, I mean, we have to be careful about what we're doing, but the fact is we are not very good at being a learning organization.
I agree. I love
Right?
what you're doing. I love the
So-
analysis and that we
Right.
should do that analysis. I think
So I'll-
it's just great.
If I may, I would
Yes,
like to add
please.
something to that. For one thing, just as a comment, I don't fully agree that it's an engineering problem, although things that I'm learning from here at Michigan, women in engineering, from their first year, a lot of them will go to bioengineering, for instance. So they find that field more appealing than they would in computer science. So although
It's
in
the
the first
grades.
year you would say, well, we don't have truly a problem, it's 30% women, which is not a bad
Well, a lot of times, I
percentage,
mean,
but-
it's heavy-duty math, heavy-duty, I mean, it's a lot of work, it's hard, and we don't know the answers. Why are they doing it? We want to know the answers. Why
And
do
that's
they
what
switch?
I wanted to add, that looking at grades, I think it is telling us part of the story in the sense of telling us what's happening, but it's not telling us why is that happening.
Right, I'm
And
fascinated
to
by
me,
it.
that's a lot of the value that we can gain from this kind of studies, like the home project or our project, where you have a more bottom-up approach, rather than starting with hypotheses and say, well, maybe they don't like math, and then you try to study that. You'd rather sort of let the data speak to you and see what are the reasons, by, say, I don't know, analyzing women's social media in computer science versus other fields, and see what are they talking about. And I think that will help us starting to understand why they have that, for instance, the great difference.
Well, fantastic. I'm glad we're talking about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for this great discussion and everybody sticking around. I'm just curious about student consent issues, especially, the ones that let you get into their Facebook and everything. I mean, you tape all the students doing procedures, Michelle, and so on. I'm just wondering qualitatively what their attitudes is about sharing data, and are there different, kind of strata of students in terms of their willingness to share data, and how do you deal with that? I mean, I'm just kind of curious about all that.
I'll address that first, because you have very specific. The Office of General Counsel at the University of Michigan has determined that use of student data that's collected by our student systems that are used in the course of being a student here is business. And FERPA doesn't disallow you from using data that you have business reasons to know. Our business is educating students, so whatever data we have that helps us understand how to do that better is fair. That's not a violation of FERPA. Now, we have been trying for years to make that a little more transparent to students, just in good faith to do that, and really haven't yet come up with a really just the right place, just the right way to do that. So for now, I mean, I think we probably worry about it more. I would rather, I think it was Bob Groves yesterday, let's stop talking about privacy and talk about ethics.
Yeah.
And so I'm not worried about student privacy, I'm worried about the ethics of what we're doing, and as long as I can stand up in front of you and defend what I'm doing in the way that I protect the student data and the care that I take with the data that I have, I feel an ethical obligation to every student here to try to help them have the best experience they can have here. So, I don't know. What?
Well, I don't have much to add. It's something that we are still in the process of learning. We are about to submit an IRB. We did have IRBs in the past for other data collections, not necessarily of the scale that we aim for in this project. hearing from other projects, in particular about social media, since Brian, you pointed to that. We were told that at this particular time in their career, students are open to sharing that, and are also open to contributing to research projects. We'll soon learn more about that, and but yeah, we have sort of reason to believe that we will not run into issues to the extent that we will protect, of course, their data, and that's what we've done in our previous studies.
So for us, one of the things that our students sign is well, we call it a code of conduct, and it has many things in there. Some of it is about not sharing content of the debriefing, of the scenarios, and the other thing in there is a consent to be videoed. And that, in part of that is we tell them that the videos will be maybe used or maybe shared for educational purposes, which would allow me to show a video here of the students in the simulation. For research then, I worked with IRB here and did an umbrella IRB that allows me to collect a lot of the learning analytics things that we do in the Clinical Learning Center. I've also done several IRBs that will target specific information, and some of that will be analyzing video, which there's no way to protect anonymity at that point in terms of I know who's in the video, but all the data that we do collect and then publish is certainly published, obviously anonymously at that point. So far, we haven't run into any roadblocks. Everything that I've done has been exempt. Done through the usual educational testing exempt category, or we've done something, we didn't intend to do a study at the time, but something came out really cool, and then we'll go back and do like a secondary data analysis on something, so.
Yeah, when I gave snaps to Office General Counsel or Provost and so forth, I also should reinforce the snaps for our IRB board, who've worked very hard over the last 15 years or more to understand social media data and what's public data and what we as researchers can do with it if it's out in the public domain. And I think that they're ahead of many other IRB boards at other schools with colleagues that I've talked to. So also, I want to make sure to give them the big
Oh, absolutely. There's times where I've talked to my colleagues and they'll say, well, actually, I have an article that's under review right now, and one of the reviewers said, I don't understand how you got the IRB to approve that, and they wanted more information about it. I'm like, happy to send you the letter. So there are people who do have much more difficulty than we do with some of the stuff. So, right. I mean, I've worked very closely with Adam from the IRB. In fact, he was coming here today. He and I have been emailing because I have to talk to him about something else. And he's like, send me your slides. I want to know, what's going on. So, I, like Stephanie, need to say kudos to our IRB. They have been wonderful to deal with in this arena and extremely helpful. So, most times, when I am doing a study like that, if I have a small group of students that I'm following with something, I let them know. I say to them, hey, I'm going to be doing a little study on this. If you don't want your data included, let me know, because oftentimes I can pull their data out. I have never had a student tell me they don't want their data. I've never had a student not want to be in a video or not want to be in one of the many little promotional videos that we've done. So, in fact, a lot of the slides that I had up there today had a bunch of students who gave me consent to be in promotional videos because I'm putting a little education module together. So students have been awesome. They really love to help each other.
Yeah, I must say that I know a lot of faculty on major universities who would die to get your general counsel. So is there any way you can get this person to publish something?
Well, it's not just one. There's a
Well, no,
number
there's a cluster of people, but there's a community here that have thought about this deeply, and I think we need to clone this somehow, because
Well,
it has been a terrible barrier in a number
Yeah,
of places.
I know that there are various places where they've talked that when we had the Learning Analytics Summer Institute here this summer, which by the way will be here again next summer, we had a privacy panel and talked there about Michigan's view on this and had representatives from Michigan.
So out of curiosity, if somebody from MIT wanted to do research on your data, would they be allowed?
What we have drafted is data sharing policies, and then with the advent of Unison, if you know what Unison is, but Canvas, we're using Canvas because Michigan is a Unison school and they're building a cloud of student data that eventually the data will be accessible to any of the Unison partner schools. So for example, the data I was referring to earlier on the grade penalty with the gender differences, you might say, well, you guys at Michigan, we've got a big problem here. But Tim then got money from the Sloan Foundation to work with a couple other schools to replicate it, to see, and sure enough, it's a systemic problem. But that took funding from an external agency and a lot of time and effort to get those people to work on it to reproduce the results. So that's all got to get easier. And then we can.
You guys are on the bleeding edge.
But we need to thank the panel here for this.
Thank you.
Fantastic closing. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
The awards are already given out. They are tremendous examples of the potential that data science has here at Michigan and beyond. I'm just going to mention two of them. One challenge grant in transportation is aimed